Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite recovering academic career podcast. What if grad school was useful, actually? It's so good to be back with you after an unplanned hiatus. So, I am adjuncting a class this fall in addition to getting the website up and my day job. And so, some things fall behind. So we took a little bit of an unplanned hiatus since classes started at the end of August, but very happy to be back here. Which reminds me of one of the pieces I always gave to graduate students when I was coaching them, which is teaching expands to fill the time that you give it. That is certainly true, and I am so happy to be back in the classroom with a great bunch of students that have given teaching a lot of time, but I'm reclaiming some of that time to get back here to y'all. I have missed you. I promised, not in the last episode of the podcast, but the episode before that I would go into more detail on the third step of my framework for identifying your academic skills that can be useful in the workplace and converting them into non-academic language. So in the last podcast of how to do that came my way with a friend who had asked me to help them with their cover letter. So I shared that, and I hope that was really helpful for y'all. So today I'm here to do what I originally intended to do, which was to go through that third step in detail. So if you didn't listen to the podcast where I outlined my 3 steps, it's just basic questions. So it's what, how, and why. So the what is to really sit down, ideally over the course of a couple of days, ideally with some friends in grad school. Doesn't have to be the same program, and go over all of the things that you've done. And when I say all, I mean all. I mean find parking, navigate public transportation, go to class, start a reading group or join a reading group, lead a discussion, give a presentation, stay on top of your homework, catch up on your homework if you fall behind, write a seminar paper, do an annotated bibliography, all of the things, right? So that is the what. So first we start with this list of what. I often recommend that folks start by putting them in categories. So, things you did when you were taking class, things you did in lab or in independent study, things you did if you were teaching or a teaching assistant or a grader, things you did as a researcher, volunteer activities, service activities, conference or other presentations, etc. So that can be a really fruitful way to kind of generate those ideas, is to break them into categories and write down everything you did for that category. So once we kind of have our what established, then we go into how. So how did you do it? So the reason for this is because you can, on the surface, do the same thing across different disciplines, but the how can be different. So I think I originally gave the example of working on statistics. So students in sociology are learning how to do statistical analysis, and students in a mathematics graduate program may also be learning how to do statistical analysis, but the how of that probably varies. So in the case of students in the mathematics graduate program, they may be learning kind of the mathematical theory behind statistics, and so they might be doing less of computing large data sets and more of doing specific examples to work out the theory and all of the nuanced statistical mathematics, where in the sociology example, it's probably going to be a little bit more practical. So you may be given a data set, large or otherwise, and asked to run certain types of analyses on it. You're probably going to be trained in a specific type of statistical software. When I was doing statistics and math, we did it by hand, but they probably don't do that anymore. So the same thing, rather, can look kind of different across genres. Even something as even something as similar as writing a seminar paper for a course is going to look different depending on the discipline that you are in and the standards and the norms of that discipline. So that is why we kind of write out the how. And then the last step is to write out the why. So why did you do that? And why has two parts. The two parts of the why are what were you supposed to, oh, you can't see my, what were you supposed to learn doing that? And what did you actually learn from doing that? So another way to think of the why is by breaking it up into two questions. So that is the method. It is the what, how, why method to identify the skills that we developed. Now, you really identify kind of the skills oftentimes in the how method. That's where the bulk of identifying the skills comes from. But the reason that we go through the why and we break that why into, what were you supposed to learn and what did you actually learn is because we don't want to identify all the skills that you have, because the job market is big. There are many jobs and we want you to get one that you love. So we don't just want you to do it. We don't just want you to identify all of the marketable skills that you have. We also want to get you to think critically about the jobs that you want to do. So the classic example for this one is group projects. Group projects are, fairly common in grad school. And a lot of times what we are supposed to learn from a group project is how to work well with colleagues, how to do collaborative research, how to do collaborative authorship. So we're supposed to learn this kind of collaborative nature of academic work. And we can learn that. Sometimes what a lot of us learn is that we don't really want to work in groups. And so that gives us a clue when we are out there looking for jobs. What jobs are we looking at? Are we looking for a job that you are more of a free agent? Are you a member of a team? Do you like group work as long as you're the leader? Some people feel that way, and there are jobs out there for you if you would like to be the leader of a group. And there are jobs out there for you if you would like to work in a group but not be the leader. Everybody has different tastes and preferences, and we want to find something that's good for you. So that is part of why we do the why exercise. The other reason, again, is to kind of drill down into what are the skills that you build. So to go back to that statistics example, in both cases, you are building a background in statistics and in quantitative analysis, but the why is going to be slightly different. Are you learning mathematical theory and doing problems by hand to really ingrain into your brain how these principles work? Or are you learning how to analyze large sets of data so that you can be a good critical reader in your discipline and so that you can analyze your own data once you collect it? Those are different things, and they generate different skill sets, both valuable, both employable, but different skill sets. So I also wanted to dedicate this particular episode to a new follower over on our Instagram. The Instagram, by the way, is ifgradschoolwasuseful. You can follow us there. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and we are on LinkedIn at Useful University. So would love to see you there, chat with you. Feel free to drop questions or topics you'd like to see covered on the podcast. But this is dedicated to a new user over on Instagram. Every time I get a new user, I try and reach out to them. First to thank them, because time is a precious resource, and I'm so grateful when people share their time with me, and also to see what they would like more of. Something got them to the page, and I want to make sure that they are getting the content that they came for, and that it's really helpful. So I messaged a new follower, as I often do. I said, thank you so much for following. I really appreciate it. If there's anything you would like to see, please don't hesitate to tell me. And they said that they are in their last year of a history program and are looking at the job market. So they were excited to find this resource. And I normally try and do kind of a split of examples between humanities, social sciences, and STEM or hard sciences fields so that everybody can kind of get a sense of how their skills translate. But because in honor of that new follower, I did want to try and do mostly history examples today. I think history examples will translate fairly well for a lot of my humanities folks. Now, in my program, I did a PhD in American Studies, but at the school I was at, American Studies was a program and not a department at that time. And so what that meant is that PhDs in American Studies had to choose one of our affiliated departments and use their departmental guidelines for things like our comprehensive exams and our prospectus, etc. So I chose history. I chose history because in my master's in communication, I had gone to a program that was very into applied communication. Well, the programs were split. So there was a communication kind of like theory program under a different name, and then there's the communication department that was very applied communication. And applied communication at this program, it meant that you were supposed to interview people. So I had a class where, I tried to interview a lot of people. I only got one person, but we had to put out a call to interview as many people as possible on a topic and transcribe it and write a research report on it. And I got good feedback from my professor on that. She suggested that I turn it into an article and publish it. But I was not interested in that because I hated that process. I didn't hate the interviewing. I didn't like how difficult it was to recruit interviewees. I did not love transcribing. P.S. This is back when we were, to sound like the oldest person in the world for a minute, we were transcribing by hand. So I had a tape recorder with a foot pedal system to rewind or to play and to fast forward. And I was just typing, I was transcribing my own stuff. So I didn't love that. And then I also worked on proposing a research study with another faculty member who I adore to this day that would have required getting IRB approval. And I think I wrote up something to submit to the IRB, and we were in the middle of working on it. And then my master's ended and I didn't do the PhD program there. And I just kind of let that go, which in retrospect, I wish I hadn't. But I bring all that up as an example of my earlier point of part of why we go through the why is because what were you supposed to learn and what did you actually learn? Well, one of the things that I learned about myself is that while I love talking to people in a social way, I do not love talking to people in an academic way. I don't really love going through the IRB process. I don't really love applying for funding to get incentives to interview people. I don't love transcribing interviews. And so when I went into my PhD, I very, very, very much knew that I wanted to research this topic, but I did not want to interview people about it. And so I looked at the departments around me and essentially asked myself, which one of these will allow me to research this topic in a way where I don't have to interview anyone? And that was history. So I was affiliated with history. I took the graduate student history methods course. I followed the history guidelines for my comprehensive exams. And I also met my former partner, who is a historian. He was in the realm of Civil War history. He studied the Civil War and Reconstruction. And fun story about that is relevant to today's topic. You may ask yourself, what jobs are there out there for Civil War historians that aren't at Civil War museums or teaching about the Civil War, etc.? So his first non-adjuncting job out of grad school was actually working for a grant-funded organization whose role was to make it easier for businesses that operated branches of their business on either side of a county line. Since the counties and the cities had different regulations, and there were several kind of local chains or small businesses that had stores in each, this organization was funded by a federal and a state grant to help business owners navigate that, to make sure that they were in compliance, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, can you think of a better job for a Civil War and Reconstructionist historian than helping two people on different sides of the county line work together? I always thought that was so fun and good for them. So, our skills can apply in unexpected ways. So just as I chose, my dissertation topic and affiliation because I didn't want to talk to people, and then, my ex-partner got this job because he really understood political nuance on working across kind of a divided geographic and political space, right? That is really what this third piece in the process, the why, is about. So what did you learn? What were you supposed to learn? What did you actually learn? Maybe you learned that you didn't like doing something. Maybe you learned that you loved policy and helping disparate groups have a policy that worked together for the benefit of everyone. So that is why we come into this why process. And so I'm going to try and think of a couple of history-specific examples. As I was preparing for this podcast, the first one that came to mind is that historians are really good at finding out where to find answers, if that makes sense. So in terms of, if you are a graduate student in history and you are researching a certain question, you are probably looking for an existing or looking to create an archive of material that can help you answer those questions. And one of the things that I think is fantastic about that, and is a really underrated skill, is that when you find the archive that you suspect has the answer to the question that you're asking, or has the material to help you formulate an answer, you don't know the answer already, right? Like it's not like you can Google it. It's not like you can say, why did this historical thing happen, and then get the type of answer that you would get in an archive with nuance, right? Like you'll get an AI overview of the current thought on it at this time, but if you are a researcher digging into kind of nuance or think there's a gap in existing literature, that's not going to help you. But what historians are really good at doing is finding the place that will probably have the answer, and then asking the questions and looking through the materials that give them the answer once they get there. And that is such an important corporate skill. This is something that executives and senior decision makers have to do all the time. Is questions come up that do not have like an easy answer. Questions come up that have not been asked before as businesses, nonprofits, and whatever entity you're working for. As it evolves, new questions come up that don't have an easy prepared answer, and the ability to know where to look to find an answer is an incredible leadership strategy, is an incredible leadership skill. Historians are also fairly good at pulling together their own archive for a specific research project. So my research project was interdisciplinary, and I pulled together several different archives. So I used digitized collections housed in different places of World War II materials, and then I kind of worked with the library to create a small collection of textbooks that I wanted to analyze in conjunction with legislation. Was able to use like the Library of Congress and Congress.gov to look at legislation, and that was the archive for my project, right? So I created this digital archive of all of these different materials to answer the question that I was looking at, which is, again, another thing that historians are excellent at and is a fantastic leadership and executive skill. Because let's say, to give an example, let's say you work for a mid-sized business that is currently debating whether or not they should invest in AI to move their business forward. And there's not an easy answer to that. There's a lot of people who want to sell you AI and their AI services. Those are expensive. Is it going to have the kind of like profit to the expense that you want, right? Is it going to have the reward for the risk that you want? And as a mid-sized business, you can't necessarily compare yourself either to large businesses and large corporations that have enough money to like invest until this works out for them, right? Or you also can't compare yourself to a small business where AI might be doing the job of kind of like an unpaid part-time staffer. You are somewhere in between. And so the solutions that work for the other end of the spectrum might not work for you. And so the skill of being able to know where to look to pull together the answers for that question, that is a skill that historians cultivate and is a fantastic leadership skill. And that leadership skill specifically is setting strategy. Strategy. I keep wanting to say strategy, like tragedy, but with an S. Setting strategy on, in the AI example, on budget. But this could apply to, if you worked in staffing, if you worked in operations, if you worked in HR, setting strategy about, corporate policy, about people-centered policy. So this can apply in a lot of ways. Pulling together the answer that is unique to your question and knowing where to look and how to do that is fantastic. And let's not forget, of course, historians know history. And I think sometimes we can forget what a flex it is to know history as a historian, or as I call myself, a part-time historian. So I'm going to give you a teaching example because it's top of mind, because I taught this morning. But I was asking my students recovering intersectionality in my intro to women's and gender studies class. So I was asking my students, why do you think that this idea of intersectionality has kind of become like a hot button topic, and some people report feeling so threatened by it, or like it's inappropriate to teach on college campuses? And one of my students brought up this point, which is, they feel threatened by the idea that they will have to compete on a level playing field, which is a good insight. And I was like, yes, that can feel very threatening. As a historian, I can tell you that while that might feel threatening, historical data shows there's not a lot of threat from that. In fact, historical data shows that, when women go into a field that is male dominated, the wages in that field dip. It's kind of like prestige dips. It's considered low skill all of a sudden. Conversely, when men go into a field that was previously women dominated, and I gave the example of computer programming, the rates go up, women are pushed out, the prestige climbs, etc. And so, while it may feel threatening to compete on a level playing field if we account for intersectionality, that actually hasn't panned out historically yet, right? And so I think just knowing history, even the kind of like broad basic history that most of us are taught in a graduate program, gives kind of a long-term perspective, which is another leadership skill, because a lot of, how do I want to put this? There is a lot in the corporate world that relies on this kind of false sense of energy. We have to get in before the bubble pops, or we have to buy this software right now to get ahead of our competitors, or we have to do these things right now. And as a historian, it can be really nice to say, okay, it might feel like we have to do these things right now, but we can take a long view of like what has happened to people in our position in the past, was it really as urgent as it felt, or do we have some time to strategize here? So I think just being a historian is low-key a flex, but I am a part-time historian, so I am biased there. Again, teaching and presenting, one of the things I think I've talked about before, how public speaking and presenting is really a grad student superpower, because most people do not like to public speak or present. Whereas if you are a grad student, you will have done it at some point. And you don't even have to you can be the worst person at public speaking. You will still probably have more experience and expertise than the average person in a corporate job. The average person, right? There are certainly some roles that are very speaking focused. But this is just something that's so ingrained as normal in our profession that we do it quite a lot. We do it in seminars, we do it at conferences. Many of us are expected to give a certain number of talks or presentations. We do it as TAs or as instructors. It's just so incredibly common, and being the person who is willing to speak, being the person who knows how to present, these are incredible assets because, when you're sitting in a room of people who've made a decision and have to figure out how to communicate that decision, and nobody wants to be the one to get up and talk about it, when you are comfortable with that, that sets you apart. And that is a basic skill that historians and really most grad students have, and especially those in the humanities. I think that humanities students, where it is much more common to TA rather than to have a research assistantship, I don't think they realize how incredibly useful that is. Interestingly, the STEM students I've worked with do. I can't tell you how many STEM students I've worked with who have asked me to find ways for them to do more presenting and teaching, even on a volunteer basis, because they know that that's an important skill and they're not getting it through their research assistantships in their home department. But that is definitely something that historians and most of my humanities folks have. In the middle of talking about public speaking and presenting and what a skill that is, a thought came to me, another kind of great skill that historians have, then it has completely left my brain in true ADHD fashion. Shoot. I hate that. I hate when that happens. Knowing how to read and process a lot of information quickly. This is another skill that most graduate students have, although what qualifies as a lot of information is different depending on disciplines. I remember a friend in paleobiology telling me that they had a very big deal publication coming out and it was 4 pages long. Whereas in history, we are more likely to be reading monographs, which are significantly longer. So while all grad students cultivate this ability to read through or skim through and get the important parts from a lot of information quickly, which is a huge asset if you are on a team making big decisions and going through a lot of data. I think historians and the humanities can do that even more so because we are often reading at a higher volume. And the other skill that I wanted to share still has not come back to me yet, which is so frustrating. So I hope that these last few examples have given an example of how, there may be skills that we all share having been through this academic process, like reading and kind of synthesizing a large amount of information quicker than the average bear, or presenting. But again, the way that programs are structured, which comes down to that, how did you do it and why did you do it in my 3-part method, those are going to give you different skills that you can build to talk about when you apply for non-academic jobs. I am still waiting for whatever that thing I wanted to share with you was to come back to mind, and it just won't, which is so frustrating. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm sure as soon as I hit stop on the recording, whatever I wanted to say will come to me, but I'll save it for the next podcast. This one has already gotten kind of long. I hope that today's ramble both made sense of that final step of the process of identifying your skills and also gave some good examples of some of the things that can make historians and humanities students in general really great candidates outside of the academy. I will, when we come back next week, I'm going to share some examples of, today we went over some skills that you develop, how to put those in what I call resume speak for non-academic resumes. So we did a little bit of that with the cover letter in the last episode, but next episode we're going to go into how do we translate some of these skills into resume bullet points. So I hope that you will join us for that one and bring a friend. Thank you for hanging out with me. It is so good to be back here with you, and I will see you all next week.